Part 1. Sasha. Tumbling. Adapted from Sasha's Tumblr page. Favorite vegetable, bok choy. Favorite animals, cat and cuttlefish. Favorite type of movie, dream sequences. 3 best qualities, navigation. My friends seem to like me. Purple. Of course I like hats. Anyone who doesn't is wrong. I like compliments. I dislike compliments. I like my hair. I give good hugs. I'm good at finding potential puns. If the whole world was listening, I might just rant about a bunch of things like gender, wealth inequality, why school is important. I like parties. I dislike parties. I don't really keep track of disappointments. Ideal vacation spot? Probably a city with a nice subway. Thinking of things to get me? Try this. A brass airship, a transit map shower curtain, a medieval cloak, a corset with silver buttons, a chiseled chunk of gallium that melts in your palm, a dress swirled with the image of a nebula, a Victorian house on wheels, tights painted like a mermaid tail. Pronouns. Even as a toddler, Sasha was interested in language. Not in learning Italian or Swahili or Mandarin, but in language itself, its shape and structure, the Lego blocks of sounds that snap together to make words and sentences. Most toddlers are interested in the fact that the animal with 2 pointy ears and a long tail is called a cat. Sasha was interested in the fact that adding an S at the end of the word cat made it plural. Look, Sasha would say, 2 cats. Before turning 3, Sasha was matching sounds with letters, sometimes in unusual ways. B is for baby, Sasha would exclaim. Y is for wire. 10 is for tent. At 4, Sasha was reading independently, but had also begun contemplating the shapes of letters. K is 1 rectangle and 2 parallelograms, Sasha announced at the breakfast table one day. M is 2 parallelograms and 2 rectangles. 2 years later, Sasha began creating a new language. It was called Astrolinguish, and it was the language of Sasha's home planet, Astrolingua. Written Astrolinguish was awash in diacritical marks, with lots of umlauts, accents, and tildes. The spoken language luxuriated in rolled R's and L's. As a senior in high school, Sasha was still inventing languages, hanging out online with other conlangers, people who construct languages of their own. By now, Sasha was working up a new language. This one never had a name, but it was spoken by the members of an imaginary agricultural society, something like that of ancient Mesopotamia. All languages embody the obsessions of the people who speak them, and so Sasha's language was meant to reflect the interests of a people whose world was dominated by growing seasons, grains, and harvests. Instead of pronouns that distinguished between male and female, Sasha's language had pronouns that distinguished between animate and inanimate objects. The word for sun was jej, which was also the word for day. The difference was that sun was considered animate, a being, and day was considered inanimate, a thing. Our language, English, works differently. We care a lot about gender, and English reflects that in its pronouns, she or he, her or him, hers or his. You might think this is just how languages work in the real world, but there are many languages on Earth that are basically gender neutral, using the same word for he, she, and it, or not using pronouns at all. You've probably heard of some of them. They include Armenian, Comanche, Finnish, Hungarian, Hindi, Indonesian, Quechua, Thai, Tagalog, Turkish, Vietnamese, and Yoruba. English, on the other hand, poses a challenge for people like Sasha, who don't see themselves as fitting into neat either-or categories like male or female. Sasha, like many gender non-conforming people, wants to be referred to with the pronoun they. It might feel awkward at first, but you'll get used to it. 1001 Blank White Cards. For their 16th birthday, Sasha asked for an accordion, a manual typewriter, a Soviet flag, and a new Rubik's Cube. They didn't know how to play the accordion, but they might have learned if they had received one, which they didn't. They didn't get the flag either, although Sasha and their friend Michael made a cardboard hammer and sickle not long afterward and hung it on Sasha's bedroom wall. At the time, they were obsessed with everything having to do with Russia and communism. Their friend Carrie, who took the bus with Sasha that year, remembers Sasha going on and on about it during the bus ride home from school. Sasha, once you get to know them, is very outspoken about things, she explains. That's once you get to know them. When you first meet Sasha, they're quiet and shy. They have chin-length, wavy brown hair, a pale, round face, and thick, dark eyebrows. When they smile, their eyes crinkle into slits. They wear glasses, round, owlish ones, and they don't always look at you straight on. As a child, they were diagnosed with Asperger's, a form of autism, which can make them awkward socially. But it also makes them passionate about their interests, and the passion eventually trumps the shyness. What was Sasha passionate about when they were a senior in high school? Buses, cartoons, and the color purple, says Healy, one of Sasha's closest friends. To that you could add communism, games, the webcomic Homestuck, and live-action role-playing, or LARPing. Also, the ska-pop-punk band Sarcasm, which was formed by some kids at Maybeck High School and had once proclaimed Sasha their biggest fan. And veganism, although Sasha disliked the way other vegans on the internet made such a huge deal about it. Sasha's best friend was Michael, a tall, gangly kid with sandy blonde hair and thick glasses who always wore a gray beanie and a green army jacket. Michael and Sasha had been pretty much inseparable since freshman year when they met while playing the board game Diplomacy. Over time, they formed the nucleus of a tight circle of friends: Sasha, Healy, Michael, Michael's girlfriend Taya, and another friend named Ian. Ian, blonde, bearded, with a habit of tucking his chin and looking up at you from under his eyebrows, was the one who never stopped talking. Red-haired Healy was the unquellable fountain of excitement who stole people's hats and wore her emotions on her sleeve. Cherub-faced Taya loved costumes and dancing. She and Michael were so close that their friends referred to them as a single person named Tykel. When the two got too cuddly, Sasha would get between them and shout, "Leave room for Jesus," at the top of their lungs, like the chaperone at a Christian prom. Sasha was the brilliant one, the one who blazed through calculus, linguistics, physics, and computer programming with a kind of effortlessness. Not that any of them were slouches when it came to academics. Kids who weren't into school were unlikely to choose Maybeck, a private high school with roughly 100 kids that rented space on 2 floors of a Presbyterian church in Berkeley. In the tiny classrooms, students gathered around conference tables and critiqued the concept of America as a shining city on a hill, or compared the writings of Charles Darwin and Ursula K. Le Guin. Teachers liked to claim that Maybeck didn't have cliques like other high schools, and it was true that the place was a refuge for kids like Healy, who had been bullied in middle school. People were nice to each other at Maybeck, accepting, but the school still had social groupings, just like any other high school: arty kids, stoners, bros. "We were the nerdy kids," Ian says. "The funny, sort of crazy, nerdy people who played video games and watched anime and read manga." All of them were fascinated by games: board games, video games, card games, role-playing games, trading card games. At lunch and after school, they often gathered at a wooden table in the hallway that people called the hex table, even though, as Ian pointed out, it was an octagon, not a hexagon. There they played cards, particularly a game Michael and Sasha had learned from a couple of seniors when they were freshmen. It was officially called 1001 Blank White Cards, although they mostly just called it index cards. It's a game played with index cards, Sasha explains, not all of which are white, and at this point, very few of which are blank. The deck grew over time, with people pilfering index cards from classrooms whenever they wanted to expand it. If you drew a blank card from the deck, that meant you could fill it in, assigning it a point value and an effect. The more random, the better. Over time, the deck filled up with in-jokes. There was a card featuring a drawing of The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway that resulted in the player losing 2 turns as you read the book and are bored to death. There was a card that required you to talk in a Russian accent, a card that required you to lisp, and a card that required you to lisp while talking in a Russian accent. There were cards that required you to play an air guitar solo, speak like an English-dubbed anime character, eat leaves like a giraffe, engage in staring contests, and end every sentence with the word dog. There was a card called Tower of Hats that required you to take everyone else's hats and wear them in a stack. There was a card that said, "Game over, Ian wins," that had been created as a birthday present for Ian. Sasha created a card called A Complete History of the Soviet Union as Told by a Humble Worker, arranged to the melody of Tetris, which was the name of a 6.5-minute song by an obscure British comedy band called Pig with the Face of a Boy. Michael and Sasha were both obsessed with the song and sang it at every opportunity. The effect of the card is that you have to sing the song or lose a turn, Sasha explains. Aside from Ian's birthday card, there was no way to win the game and no real goal. They just played until people had to go home. By graduation, the stack of index cards was about 2 feet high and had to be carried in a special bag. But at the beginning, most of those 1001 white cards were blank. Back then, Sasha was called Luke, and they were referred to as he. Luke and Samantha. In middle school, Sasha was brainy, shy, and introverted, the kind of kid who is easy to overlook. Sasha's father, Carl, refers to that quality as Sasha's invisibility cloak. They blend into the background, he explains. They've always been that sort of kid, that nobody even knows they're there. Sasha didn't seem to need other people much. In fact, they often said that the world would be better off without humans in it at all. The world inside their head was fascinating enough. They thought about numbers a lot, and shapes, and the size of the universe. They drew imaginary subway maps and worked out math problems on a whiteboard the family kept in the breakfast nook. They were interested in space and Legos and trains and the ancient Greeks, and they noticed things most people didn't, like the subtle shades within the green of a leaf, or the geometric shapes within a sculpture. They loved cats and had a habit of meowing. Sasha couldn't say whether any of this was because they had Asperger's, because, of course, they'd never not had Asperger's. The only mind they'd ever been inside was their own. In 6th grade, Sasha started attending a tiny K-8 Montessori school with about 25 kids in each grade. They were in a mixed-age class of 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, and there was just one other new kid that year, an apple-cheeked 5th grader named Samantha. She looked right past Sasha's invisibility cloak and saw a kindred spirit. Samantha was a head taller than Sasha, with tousled blonde hair, ivory skin that flushed easily, and wire-rimmed glasses. Her family moved around a lot, and at 10 she'd already lived in 5 states and attended 6 different elementary schools. But she had never had a best friend. She was used to being an outcast, to feeling both smarter than other kids and stupider. Her dad was a nanotechnologist whose laboratory was in their basement. He'd been giving her what he called dad homework for her whole life, and she'd always gotten pleasure from demonstrating her intelligence. Yet she could never seem to learn the rules that other kids played by, the rules that defined how you were supposed to talk and how you were supposed to look and what you were supposed to be interested in. Rules that defined how smart was too smart. Samantha noticed that Sasha wrote their name on homework assignments in Greek letters. She noticed that Sasha loved math and costumes and imaginary worlds. She noticed how passionate Sasha was about everything. Their conviction that the ancient Greeks were better than the ancient Romans, that base 12 counting was better than base 10, that cats were better than dogs. She noticed Sasha's long eyelashes and their curly, shoulder-length brown hair. "Samantha has a crush on me," Sasha told Carl with a kind of anthropological interest. And it was true, she did. It didn't take long for the two of them to become inseparable. Sasha adopted Samantha's way of talking, pronouncing fail when something was lame and LOL when something was funny. They played Dungeons and Dragons and then left the 12-sided die on the floor and invented magical battles of their own. They each adopted a tiny invisible baby dragon. Sasha's was named Cinnamon, Samantha's was Pendragon. They invented stupid TV shows, unleashing a cavalcade of ever-increasing banality as they tried to out-stupid each other. They were so close that Samantha felt like Sasha was inside her head, thinking her thoughts before she'd even thought them herself. That closeness, of course, drew the attention of their classmates. As far as anyone could tell, Samantha was a girl and Sasha was a boy. The teasing was merciless. Everyone wanted to know if they were boyfriend and girlfriend, if they were KISSING. They weren't. It drove Samantha crazy. She once grabbed a classmate by the arm, yelling, "Stop making fun of us!" Her fingers hit a pressure point, and the girl screamed in pain. Samantha felt terrible about it, but still, why couldn't everyone just leave them alone? It was part of that disorienting feeling she'd had for years, that feeling that everyone except her had been issued a handbook. Samantha knew it was important to be pretty and cute, but she had no idea how to be those things, or even why she was supposed to want to be. Her body was growing curvier. Breasts burst from her chest like twin cannonballs, but they didn't feel sexy and good. They just felt heavy. She hid them under baggy t-shirts and sweatshirts and watched the other girls come to school in tiny skirts and spaghetti straps, wondering why everything was so much harder for her than it was for them. "Tell me how to be popular," she begged one of the spaghetti strap girls. The girl's expression, her lowered eyes, the way she glanced around seeking escape, told Samantha what a mistake the question had been. If you have to ask, it's out of reach. Something was wrong with her, really wrong. She was angry, she was sad, she was afraid, she wanted to die. In 6th grade, she said so in class. Her teacher told her parents, who took her to a therapist. One day, Samantha told the therapist about a video she'd seen on YouTube. 2 young women stood back to back, performing a slam poem called Her, rotating to face the mic as they gave voice to a girl named Melissa and the boy inside her named James. Sometimes she wishes she could rip the skin off her back. Every moment of every day she feels trapped in the flesh of a stranger. Watching it, Samantha felt something chime inside her, a bell vibrating in resonance. Before puberty, her physical body didn't seem to have that much to do with who she was. People used to mistake her for a boy, but she'd felt proud to be a girl. But now, being a girl was like being stuffed into a heavy, constricting costume. She could barely breathe in it. The rules of the universe were fixed. You look a certain way, and so you have to act a certain way, and people are going to treat you a certain way. There was no way to alter it. I think I might be transgender, she whispered to her therapist the next week. I don't think you know what transgender means, her therapist replied. The bell that had been chiming inside her fell silent. She's the expert, Samantha thought. It would be another year before she told anyone else. Y'all don't know. Caprice found it hard to go to school. In her time in the Oakland schools, she'd seen plenty of kids drop out or get kicked out, get shot, or get pregnant. But Richard was supposed to be different. I can't even hardly express the feelings I have, because I knew where he was trying to go, she says. I knew he would be the one graduating from here. The no-hate banners were everywhere, but no one was talking about Richard. Abdel Kawi, the school principal, had concluded the letter he read over the loudspeaker by reminding students to show our student, currently in custody, compassion and tolerance. But Richard's friends felt that this last bit had gotten plastered over by the reams of no-hate posters. One by one, they showed up in Caprice's office to complain. They said it was a hate crime, but he had family that wasn't straight, Richard's friend Lydell said. We were with no hate, but in Richard's case, it wasn't hate. What he did was wrong, as like a joke, playful. It was like a funny little prank joke turns to something that ends your whole life. To Lydell, it just seemed like the outside world didn't grasp how easy it was for kids who grew up in poor neighborhoods to take that wrong turn. People have different habitats, he explained. Some people have it better than others. They grew up in good neighborhoods. Their family has jobs. They have good income. They don't understand. Their life is so good, they think everybody's life is good. They don't understand the struggles people go through. I don't know where you grew up at, if it's like a low-income area where there's a lot of violence and crime, but if you grew up in a low-income area and all you see is crime and drugs, if you have family that does crime, you see it. It has an impact on you. If you're around it a lot, it's hard to do good. It just hurt, Cherie said. Somebody you were that close to, and it becomes like all viral? She shook her head. People would say all type of stuff, like he was just intentionally trying to burn him. Like, oh yeah, he gay, he hecka gay, let's burn him. I'm not saying what he did was right. I'm just saying at the end of the day, he was 16. You're all just trying to put an opinion on something that you don't know. Y'all don't know. Gran Turismo 2. Sasha and Samantha were playing Gran Turismo 2 in Sasha's basement. Samantha was in 7th grade, Sasha was in 8th. Samantha took a breath. I have something really important to tell you. Sasha's eyes were on the screen where their 2 cars were racing. What? I'm transgender. She told Sasha about the way she'd been feeling and about the response she'd gotten from her therapist the year before. You're the only one who knows what you feel, Sasha said. If that's the word for what you feel, then stick with that. Now, what's the important thing you had to tell me? 5 years later, a handsome, apple-cheeked young man named Andrew would look back at that conversation as one of the most validating moments of his life. It wasn't that I was expecting Sasha to react poorly, because I know Sasha, and Sasha is easily one of the smartest people I've ever met, and also one of the kindest, he recalled. But taking a risk like that and having everything be okay afterward felt so good. Back in 7th grade, Andrew rarely spoke about gender with Sasha after that one conversation. He wouldn't tell his parents he was trans for another year. For a while, he convinced himself that being a girl would be okay, that being trans was just too hard a life. When Sasha was in 9th grade, Andrew was their date to the Maybeck prom. He wore a bottle green dress and blood red lipstick, and his hair was dyed coppery orange. But it was still just a costume. The dress, the lipstick, the hair, the body. By the time he started high school in the fall, Andrew had already begun his gender transition. How do you know what gender you are? Sasha and Andrew were hanging out in Sasha's bedroom. It was the winter of 2012. Sasha was a sophomore at Maybeck High School, and Andrew was a freshman at a public high school nearby. Sasha was at the computer, showing Andrew the ins and outs of the board game Diplomacy. "Andrew," Sasha said, "I don't know if this is rude or not, but I was wondering how you realized you were a guy." "I just knew I wasn't a girl," Andrew explained. "I just knew that was not who I was at all." Andrew had recently been hospitalized after contemplating suicide. Even though he'd started high school as a boy, his trans status was a topic of constant rumor and gossip. People at school kept coming up and saying awkward and nonsensical things like, "I heard you got a sex transplant." And then his mother had a psychotic episode and his grandfather died, and it was just too much all at once. Now, as Sasha explained that they also were questioning their gender, Andrew felt a rush of relief, similar to the one he'd felt when he came out to Sasha. The fact that someone like Sasha, who I respected so much, was also going through this, it was another thank God moment, Andrew remembered later. Like, I'm not such a weird person. Not everyone had that reaction, though. For most people, the question was kind of mysterious. "I just know," Sasha's father Carl said when Sasha asked how he knew he was a man. "It's who I am." That seemed to be true for most people. They just knew. Whether or not the appearance of their body matched the gender in their mind, there was some core understanding. My identity is this. But Sasha didn't feel that. Didn't feel strongly, this is what I am. Didn't feel strongly, this is what I'm not. Other people seemed to have a file in their brain marked gender. Sasha ransacked their own brain looking for the file, but it didn't seem to be there. So what did that mean? The idea of not having a gender wasn't frightening to Sasha, but it wasn't a relief either. Maybe this is just a phase, Sasha thought. Maybe I'm just overthinking things. But maybe not. Maybe the question was its own kind of answer. Maybe the place in between was a real place. For me, at least, gender queer includes an aspect of questioning, Sasha explains. The fact that I was questioning my gender meant that I was gender queer. Still, Sasha kept probing. On Facebook, they posted a status update asking, "What is your preferred pronoun?" "Your Highness," Carl quipped. But afterward, he asked Sasha what the question meant. Sasha explained that there were other choices besides he and she, choices like it or they, or more recently invented gender-neutral pronouns like ni, v, and z, spelled ze or xe. Listening, it became clear to Carl that this was a topic Sasha had been thinking about a lot. Not long afterward, Sasha was talking with their parents about someone they'd met online who identified as gender queer. "Are you gender queer?" asked Debbie, Sasha's mother. "Yeah," Sasha said. That was the extent of the conversation. But that night, Sasha posted on Google+, "Just came out as genderqueer to my parents. Basically, I don't identify as masculine or feminine." Reading the post and the congratulatory comments that followed it, Debbie and Carl were left scratching their heads. Apparently, something big had just happened, but they weren't entirely sure what it was. What did genderqueer even mean? Genderqueer. Debbie and Carl had always had a good relationship with Sasha. As a family, They joked around a lot, but they also talked seriously about the stuff that mattered. And clearly, this gender stuff mattered to Sasha. Only it was kind of hard to figure out why. Was this about sex? About love? About changing your body? "I'm trying to get my head around it," Debbie said 2 years after that first conversation. "I understand coming out as gay or even trans, but this is harder for me to understand." She and Carl were sitting side by side on the claret-colored sofa in their living room, framed by the bay window behind them. They live in a snug green bungalow in Oakland's Glenview district, about a mile from Oakland High School. Debbie, who works as a bookkeeper at a private elementary school, has a mobile, expressive face framed by blonde, chin-length hair. Her gestures are broad and comic. Carl is shyer and more quiet, a former college radio DJ turned public school kindergarten teacher. He has a gentle, thoughtful manner, punctuated by a dry wit. He wears his silvering hair short on the sides and has a rainbow friendship bracelet tied around one wrist. Debbie's mind kept going to the sex part. Who did Sasha want to sleep with? After Sasha announced they were gender queer, she asked for clarification. "Who are you attracted to? Do you have sexual feelings for men?" But that wasn't the issue for Sasha. They weren't all that interested in having sex with anyone actually. And anyway, terms like homosexual or heterosexual made no sense if you didn't identify as one gender or another. Most of us see gender and sexuality and romance as one big, interconnected tangle of feelings. This is who I am, this is who I'm attracted to, this is who I love. But as Sasha began exploring the topic online, they found that some people had developed language for combing the tangle into individual strands. In these online conversations, the word sex referred purely to biology, the chromosomes, organs, and anatomy that define male and female from the outside. Gender was the word for what people felt about themselves, how they felt inside. Sexuality was the category for who you were physically attracted to. Romantic was the category for who you felt romantic attraction to. And there was a whole array of distinctions within each category as well. It was like a gigantic menu with columns and columns of choices. Gender, sex, sexuality, romance. Some terms. Because language is evolving rapidly, and because different people have different preferences, always adopt the language individuals use about themselves, even if it differs from what's here. Terms for gender and sex. Agender, neutrois, doesn't identify as any gender. Androgynous, identifies as a third gender that blends male and female characteristics. Bigender, gender fluid, sometimes identifies as male and sometimes as female. Cisgender, the opposite of transgender. Gender matches their birth sex. Gender questioning, is unsure about where they belong on the gender spectrum. Gender queer, non-binary. Gender identity doesn't fit neatly into male-female categories. Intersex, born with sexual anatomy, organs, or chromosomes that don't seem to fit the typical definitions of female or male. Replaces the outdated and offensive term hermaphrodite. Transgender, feels their gender is different from their birth sex, whether or not they have physically changed their body or outward presentation. A transgender man is someone who currently identifies as male. A transgender woman is someone who currently identifies as female. Terms for sexuality. Asexual, not physically attracted to anyone. Bisexual, physically attracted to both men and women. Cupiosexual, doesn't feel sexual attraction, but is still interested in sex. Graysexual, mostly doesn't feel sexual attraction, but does occasionally. Heterosexual, physically attracted to people of the opposite gender. Homosexual, physically attracted to people of the same gender. Pansexual, physically attracted to people across the gender spectrum. Terms for romantic inclination: aromantic, not romantically attracted to anyone; biromantic, romantically attracted to both men and women; cupioromantic, doesn't feel romantic attraction, but is still interested in romance; heteroromantic, romantically attracted to people of the opposite gender; homoromantic, romantically attracted to people of the same gender; panromantic, romantically attracted to people across the gender spectrum; qua-romantic, doesn't understand the difference between romantic and platonic love. Sasha's terms. In the end, these were the terms Sasha felt described them best: agender, gray cupiosexual, qua-romantic, also vegan. Becoming Sasha. Discovering the existence of genderqueer identity felt like discovering a secret room. All this time there had been just 2 rooms, male and female. Now it turned out there was another room, one that could be furnished however you wanted. The more time Sasha spent in this room, the more comfortable it felt. But the person who lived in this new room still had a boy's name, Luke. By the second half of sophomore year, that name clearly no longer fit. One afternoon, when Andrew was hanging out at Sasha's house, the 2 of them began looking at unisex names on Wikipedia. Jamie, Shannon, Taylor, Fran, Jackie, Chris, Bobby, Kai, Parker, Quinn, Sasha. Sasha was the Russian nickname for both Alexandra and Alexander, which was Sasha's middle name, and Sasha was crazy about all things Russian. The name was perfect. Gradually, Sasha asked their parents and close friends to call them Sasha instead of Luke. That spring, Sasha wrote a piece for the Maybeck School zine, The Pineapple, about their exploration of gender. They used their new name as the byline. Most people at school had no idea who this Sasha person was, but as students and staff made the connection between Sasha and the person formerly known as Luke, they absorbed the information without much comment. It wasn't really drama, Michael recalls. It was just a change. Ian has 2 moms, so he was pretty comfortable with LGBTQ stuff. He remembers his thought process going like this: okay, not male. Okay, not female. So, neither? Okay. That was the process, and it took about 10 seconds, he says. Then it was over. I just rolled with the fact that Sasha was agender, Taya says. I think it was my first experience with it, but I was raised by hippies. At another school, a student who stepped outside the usual gender categories might have been the topic of gossip or debate, or at least a few raised eyebrows. But Maybeck's small student body already included 1 student who was agender and 2 who were transgender. Multiple people would come out and you'd be like, okay, they're this, and they use this name and this pronoun now, says Sasha's friend, Carrie. I mean, like, not everyone was good at it, but the people who were friends with trans people were. The friends who made the effort to get it right gave Sasha the confidence to correct the acquaintances who got it wrong. And more, the pronoun he felt wrong. I don't want for people to think of me as a he, and when they say he, not only does it reinforce in their brains that I am a he, it also reinforces it in the brains of the people who are listening. Sasha explains, it doesn't really directly affect me, at least to hear it. It's more like, huh, that's not right. And when people use the right pronouns, when they use they or another gender-neutral pronoun, it feels validating. A card called Luke, Sasha, person, was added to the index card deck. If someone calls Sasha by the wrong name, the card instructed, the offender must discard a card from her hand. Bathrooms. Sometimes, Debbie felt as she stood at the gas station, the whole non-binary thing was a pain in the ass. It was Thanksgiving, 2012, Sasha's junior year of high school. Debbie, Carl, and Sasha were driving to Southern California to spend the holiday with Debbie's sister. A couple of hours in, Sasha had requested a bathroom stop, which was why they were now parked at a gas station off Interstate 5. But Sasha had surveyed the two options, men and women, and walked back to the car. "There's no bathroom for me," they said, climbing into the back seat. Debbie was furious. Was this really how Sasha was going to go through life, with their bladder full to bursting? "It's not healthy," she fumed. "There's not always going to be a bathroom available for you. You have to be more flexible." But Sasha refused to budge. They held it in for the rest of the 6-hour drive. It was tough sometimes, watching Sasha navigate a world that didn't even have a category for them. Occasionally, Debbie wished Sasha would ease up a little, resist correcting well-meaning relatives who said he instead of they, for example. But there was something admirable about it, too, Carl pointed out. Knowing how shy Sasha was, he admired Sasha's newfound willingness to speak up, to stand out, to be seen. I wonder if Sasha hadn't been in a school where alternatives to the norm were part of the culture and accepted, if they would have been struggling more to figure out where they fit in the scheme of things. He said, "It feels like making this discovery has really helped Sasha become themselves." Bathrooms revisited. Over the course of the next year, Sasha found a way to deal with the problem of bathrooms. At Maybeck, they used the staff bathroom. Out in the world, they used whatever bathroom had the shortest line, whatever bathroom was closer, or whatever bathroom was least conspicuous. If they had to use the bathroom multiple times in one place, they alternated. Nobody seemed to care which bathroom they used, or if they did. Sasha didn't notice. Skirts. Sasha wore a skirt for the first time during sophomore year, on Maybeck's annual cross-dressing day. This was before they started thinking about gender, when dressing up as a girl was just a gag that the whole school was taking part in, everyone, regardless of orientation, clothed in exaggerated masculine or feminine costumes. Sasha borrowed a skirt from their friend Carrie, who lived in Sasha's neighborhood. What struck them then was how comfortable it was to wear one. In January 2013, when Sasha was a junior, they turned to Carrie again. "I don't have any feminine clothes," they complained. Sasha had been identifying as agender for almost a year by now, but they still dressed the same as they always had, like a boy. "I have lots of feminine clothes," Carrie replied. "Too many." She brought a garbage bag full of hand-me-downs to school, mostly skirts she'd worn in middle school. Sasha sifted through them, and after trying on a few skirts in the bathroom, chose 3 to take home. Aside from during one school trip to China, they never wore pants again. Previously, Sasha's style had tended toward steampunk, top hat and tweeds, vests, bow ties, even a pocket watch and a pair of fighter pilot goggles. Sasha liked the sartorial gender mashup that came from adding a skirt to this ensemble. Masculine above, feminine below. But there were plenty of days when they didn't bother getting fancy, pairing one of Carrie's old skirts with a t-shirt and knee socks. The outfits weren't flamboyant, but they made Debbie nervous. She knew Sasha would be fine at school. If anything, the skirts gave them a little extra cachet at Maybeck, where unconventionality was an asset. It was the bus that worried her. Wearing skirts meant that Sasha was shedding that cloak of invisibility. Now they weren't just visible, but conspicuous. And outside of the cocoon of Maybeck High School, being conspicuous wasn't always a good idea. Transgender people are the victims of an astonishing amount of violence. 1 out of every 4 trans people has experienced a bias-driven assault, and the numbers are higher for trans women, trans people of color, and people who identify as neither male nor female. Of the 860 non-binary people who responded to the 2008 National Transgender Discrimination Survey, 32% had been physically assaulted. "Did anyone give you a hard time?" Debbie would ask when Sasha got home from school. The answer was always no. "No, it's fine, I'll be all right." One day at a bus stop, an older woman approached Sasha. "Why are you wearing a skirt?" she demanded. "You're not a girl." "I'm wearing a skirt because I like wearing skirts," Sasha replied. That was the worst of it. A single, unfriendly question from a woman old enough to be Sasha's grandmother. Even so, Debbie worried. Running. Carl was out for a run on Hillegas Avenue, a residential street close to the border between Oakland and Berkeley. It was late November 1987. He was in his early 20s, unmarried, and working at a nearby cafe. Fugitive scents wisped past his nose as he ran. Oak leaves, fog, jasmine, car exhaust, ocean breeze, his own sweat. He was lost in the staccato thud of his shoes hitting the pavement, the huff of his breath, the metronome of his heart. "Hey, I like your legs." A truck slowed down to roll behind him. Heart beat louder now, his chest a megaphone. A side-eye peep. 3 young guys in a pickup. One leaned out the window. "Let me suck your prick." Adrenaline gushed into Carl's veins. He veered down busy Alcatraz Avenue, legs churning. The truck followed. He doubled back to Hillegas, heartbeat pounding out the words of his puzzlement. What do they want from me? His pursuers threw the truck into reverse and revved past him, slowing down to let one of the men get out. Carl sprinted down a side street. The truck zoomed forward again, following. Carl's t-shirt was damp with a melange of different kinds of sweat. Heat, effort, fear. Adrenaline kited him down the street. Then the truck pulled over just in front of him. The driver got out, blocking the sidewalk. "Hey, why don't you talk to us?" Carl halted in mid-stride. Alarm swamped his ears. "Because I'm busy," he choked out. He didn't even hear the second guy come up behind him. When he came to, he was lying on the sidewalk in a circle of concerned bystanders, his head and face aching. The police were on their way. The guys who had attacked him were long gone. That evening, he wrote about the incident in his journal. "Pretty bizarre," he commented. He didn't bother ruminating on why he'd been singled out, why the men had assumed he was gay. It was just a random event, a one-time thing, not likely to be repeated. The petition. All school meetings at Maybeck are held every Wednesday in the sanctuary of the Presbyterian Church downstairs. Students sprawl in the pews to hear musical performances, make announcements, and sometimes hear a guest speaker. One day in March of junior year, Sasha mounted the semicircular stage and announced 3 things. 1, I'm Sasha, and I identify as agender. 2, it's important to respect people's preferred pronouns, and if you're not sure what those are, you should ask. 3, I'm petitioning the White House to recognize non-binary gender. Anyone can start a petition on the We the People website at whitehouse.gov requesting that the federal government address a problem or change a policy. If a petition gets enough signatures within a 30-day window, the White House will issue an official response. Sasha's petition read as follows: Legal documents in the United States only recognize male and female as genders, leaving anyone who does not identify as one of these two genders with no option. Australia and New Zealand both allow an X in place of an M or an F on passports for this purpose, and the UK recognizes MX, pronounced mix, as a gender-neutral title. This petition asks the Obama administration to legally recognize genders outside the male-female binary and provide an option for these genders on all legal documents and records. To Sasha's astonishment, the petition garnered more than 27,000 signatures. That would have been enough to trigger an official response from the White House were it not for a petition circulated a couple of months earlier asking the White House to build a Death Star like the one in the movie Star Wars. After the Death Star petition got more than 34,000 signatures, the White House raised the number of signatures required for an official response from 25,000 to 100,000. Still, 27,000 signatures wasn't too shabby. That was 27,000 people reading and agreeing with my words that I had written, Sasha said. That felt pretty great. Clipboards. At the end of the school year, Sasha went to Sequoia Elementary School, where Carl worked, to help pack up his kindergarten classroom for the summer. As they boxed up books and folders and unpinned words from the word wall, Sasha noticed the pair of clipboards parents used to sign out their kids at the end of the day. One clipboard was marked girls, the other was marked boys. What about the kids who aren't either one? Sasha asked. Which clipboard do they go on? It's just a logistical thing, Carl explained. I want to have clipboards on both sides of the door so there isn't a big line. It's just easier this way. He couldn't imagine that kindergartners would care about gender one way or the other. In August, when Carl returned to his classroom to set up for the new school year, he unpacked the clipboards from the box where Sasha had stowed them. As he hung them up on their hooks by the door, Sasha's comment came back to him. Would it really be that hard to divide things up some other way? Using a black Sharpie, he wrote new labels for the clipboards, A through M and N through Z. It was a little thing, easy enough to change, he decided. 3 years later, Carl's classroom included a boy who sometimes liked to dress as a princess and a girl who talked about maybe being a boy someday. Turned out, Sasha was right, Carl said. Kindergartners don't want to be pigeonholed. Best day ever. Best day ever. It was a trademark Sasha phrase, as in, that was the best day ever. If you have a lot of obsessions, a lot of things you really like, the opportunity for best days ever increases. On a college visit to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge the summer before senior year, Sasha met a fellow fan of the intricately plotted webcomic Homestuck on a subway platform. The person complimented Sasha's skirt and said, I would be wearing mine, but it's in the wash. The two exchanged Tumblr URLs. Best day ever. Because Subway. Because Cambridge. Because Homestuck. Because Tumblr. Because skirt. Dress code. Sleek or flouncy, cinched at the waist, pleated, knitted, patterned, plain. At Camino Real High School in 1968, girls wore skirts or went home. Pants, pants, let girls wear pants. Debbie and her friends stood up on two fabric-swaddled legs and won. Still, there were rules. No jeans, no minis. Once, Debbie made herself a dress from an Indian bedspread. High neck, paisley print. Hippie meets granny. The school sent her home. That ruffled draping skirt, they said, was just too long. Sasha and Nemo. The call to evacuate came about an hour after the students from Maybeck arrived in Yosemite for the school's annual camping trip. It was August 2013, just before the start of Sasha's senior year. The Rim Fire, the third largest wildfire in California history, was sizzling toward the campsite near Groveland, turning the sky a smoky orange. Sasha climbed into the back of a U-Haul-style truck with Nemo, who was a year younger. The truck was airless, hot, and cramped. "We kind of died," Nemo explained later. "We didn't actually die," Sasha said. "We were both freaking out," Nemo said. "That was our first date." The two of them were talking to filmmaker Lonnie Shavelson, who was making a documentary film about non-binary gender called 3 to Infinity. Nemo identifies as gender fluid. "To me, gender fluid means I have the potential to be anything, any gender at any time," Nemo explained. "I can be male, female, masculine, feminine, neither, both." Like Sasha, Nemo uses they, them pronouns. Sasha and Nemo knew each other from the school's queer club and had gone to see Les Miserables together the year before. But after their ordeal in the back of the evacuation truck, their relationship changed, although neither of them was exactly sure how to define it. Both teenagers were shy and awkward, looking at each other more than at the camera. But they did their best to explain. "Our relationship is," Sasha said. "Confusing," Nemo finished. "It's a platonic relationship," Sasha said. "But with elements other people might consider romantic. Cuddling and kissing and stuff," Nemo added. "But it's not romantic. It's also non-sexual. It's like, take a regular relationship and instead of kissing, put cuddling and stuff like that. And instead of I love yous, it's like, you're the greatest." "I'm aromantic," Sasha explained. "So I don't really do romantic relationships." "And I'm asexual, so I don't do sexual relationships," Nemo said. "Our relationship sort of sprang fully formed on that camping trip or at that fire evacuation," Sasha added. "It just started happening. It was like, yep, this is it. This is how it works. We sort of stabilize each other or complement each other." In Homestruck, it's called a moirail, a most important person. A soulmate, maybe, but not in the romantic sense. The fact that both of them identified as non-binary wasn't the reason they were together. It was just another thing they had in common. Part 2. Richard. Book of Faces. Pictures of Richard posted on Facebook. Smiling beside his cousin's slit-eyed hilarity. Deadpan in ladies' tortoiseshell sunglasses. At 14 in a beanie, round-faced, bright-eyed. At 16, jaw slack, brows raised, expression asking, "What?" Soft-eyed on a sofa, younger brother cuddled on his chest. Standing with Skeet, spines straight, chins up, peas in a pod. And later, beside Skeet's picture, wearing a bandana in tribute. Mirror selfie, hand lodged in his waistband, not even looking up. None of it captures how he looks in conversation, how his eyes hold your eyes, seeing you see him. His own secret power? That paying attention. First day. The smell that is the lemon pine disinfectant of just mopped floors. That is new jeans, still chemical scented. Pencil shavings, sweat, fryer grease, body spray, reeking bathrooms, weed smoke, morning breath. The smell that is the salty press of bodies changing classes. That is socks, that is feet, that is blood, that is bones. That is finding your way through halls and upstairs to a classroom filled with unnamed faces. That smell is the pungent eraser that wipes the whiteboard clean. So just ignore the ghosts of last year's scrawl. Still there. Still showing through. An old friend. Cherie couldn't believe it when she saw Richard at Oakland High School. "Oh, my God," she cried, hugging him. The two of them had grown up in the same apartment building over by 87th Avenue, a 2-story tan stucco building with a couple of wind-blown Monterey pines in front. Back in 9th grade, they'd been inseparable, even though they went to different schools. Now they were juniors, and they hadn't seen each other for more than a year. It had been a terrible year for both of them. They were still broken. Maybe they'd never be fixed again. But it was so good to see each other. Even depressed and hurting, Cherie sparkled. She was funny, sassy, and head-turningly pretty, with creamy brown skin, long straight hair, and a perky, pierced nose. Richard was good-looking, too, round-faced and hazel-eyed, with a way of holding your gaze that could make you feel like you were at the center of the world. He was so light-skinned that people often assumed he was mixed, and he acted younger than he was. Hyphy, as they say in Oakland. Always smiling, always joking, always goofing around, whether or not it was the time for it. You don't want to be bothered. He'll just keep talking to you, keep playing, to the point where you'll cuss him out and he'll still be laughing, Cherie says. He likes attention. He likes to bother you. He likes to play hit you, play fight with you, like, leave me alone, oh my God. Around strangers he was quiet, alert, fading into the background until he was just a pair of hazel eyes watching everything go down. But if you were his friend, then you were family to him. He called you brother or sister, and he'd be loyal until the sun quit rising in the east. He got on my nerves, but I loved him to death, Cherie recalls. He was my friend. I don't know what I would do without him. Oakland High School. High wasn't the best school in Oakland, but it wasn't the worst one either, not by a long shot. It was right in the middle of almost every respect. Perched upslope from downtown, it was high enough on the hill that you could roll a quarter down Park Boulevard and have it land with a splash in Lake Merritt, but not high enough to float above all the regular Oakland drama. Few white families sent their kids there, but every other group did. Asians, 44%, African Americans, 33%, Latinos, 18%. Oakland's open enrollment process allowed families to apply to any school in the district, and Oakland High was a popular choice. Kids traveled from all over the city, north, east, and west, leaving behind their neighborhood skirmishes for a school they hoped might be a little safer, a little saner than the one closer to home. There was a security guard posted at the front gate to keep the craziness out, but there was plenty of craziness to be found inside. Some of it you had to look for, but some of it was hard to ignore. A girl trying to slit her wrists in the bathroom, a fight in the hallways, students shouting, running, sobbing, rumors about who got shot and who hooked up, who was looking for whom, and what they'd say when they found them. You could steer clear of it, though. Plenty did. There were AP classes and academies, public health, visual arts, environmental science. There was an African American male achievement program to mentor black boys. There was an on-site wellness center with counseling, health, and academic support services. There was football, baseball, basketball, track, as long as you could keep your GPA above a 2.0. The finish line was marked with a cap and gown and a march across the stage. That year, 2/3 of Ojai students made it. You could get there if nothing knocked you down. But life had a way of sticking its foot out, sending you sprawling. And then you were part of the other 1/3, hanging in the hallways instead of going to class, or just drifting away altogether, away from school, away from that march across the stage, into a future that was as hazy as weed smoke. Of course, you rarely noticed when you come to the fork in the road. It just feels like another day. A day when you didn't go to school because you were sick, or your baby sister was sick, or you didn't study for that test, so why bother taking it? Or your clothes looked ratty and you were tired of hearing about it. Or someone was looking for you and you needed to lay low for a few days. Or any of 100 other reasons that made not going to class seem like a better choice than going. Only once you stopped going, it just seemed too hard to start again. Days rolled into weeks, weeks into months, and then at some point, you realized you'd entered the future, the one you never planned on, the one where everything was going to be that much harder. Miss Caprice. It was 3 weeks after the start of the 2013-2014 school year, and a friend of Richard's was being sent home for fighting. She texted Richard to tell him, and he went to meet her at the bus stop. It was still the middle of the day, but he didn't care. He was a junior now, but back when he and Cherie were in 9th grade, they ditched school all the time, wandering through the city with their friends, looking for fun, courting trouble. He wasn't really in the habit of going to school all day, every day. But when Richard's friend showed up at the bus stop, she wasn't alone. She was being escorted by a petite woman with long black hair, dangly earrings, and a smile like a flash of sunlight. Her name was Caprice Wilson, and she was Ojai's attendance compliance officer. She didn't know Richard, but she knew he was a student, and it was the middle of the school day. Richard's friend needed to get on that bus and go home, she said, but Richard needed to get to class. Richard followed her back to school, peppering her with questions. Who was she, and what did she do? She seemed different from your typical school official. She had a homegirl vibe. "I'm the truancy coordinator," Caprice said, "and what happens is, if you miss a lot of school, then you're in an intervention program with me." "So you try to help kids that's been in trouble?" Richard asked. Caprice nodded. "Well, that's me," he said. "Can I get in your program?" Caprice stared at him. Nobody ever asked to join her program. Students were assigned to it after they'd missed so much school they were in danger of flunking out, dropping out, or getting kicked off the roster. She wasn't exactly trying to fill slots either. At a school with 1,875 kids, she had a caseload of some 800 chronically truant students, and if she was lucky, she'd be able to work with 275 of them in the course of a year. "Yeah," Richard said, "I want you to help me like you helped them, because I've been to a lot of schools, and I've been in trouble, but I'm really not a bad kid." Back in her office, Caprice looked up Richard's transcript. He was already a junior, and her program was meant for freshmen and sophomores who were easier to get back on track than juniors and seniors. But it was clear he needed help. His grades were poor, his attendance spotty. Ojai was his 3rd high school in Oakland, plus he'd spent sophomore year living in a group home in Redding, California, 3.5 hours away. He'd been placed there by the juvenile authorities after being arrested for fighting when he was a freshman. Next time they talked, Caprice told Richard that if he worked with her, he'd have to learn a new set of rules. "Once you cross over into this lane, you know what you'll be able to get away with?" she asked him. He shook his head, puzzled. "What?" "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because I'm going to make you understand the family motto, never let your obstacles become more important than your goal. Right now, your goal is to graduate, and if you don't comply with the family motto, then just know I have a collection of belts in the back of my filing cabinet, and they're not for sagging pants." Richard laughed. "I understand," he said, and grinned. The Princess of East Oakland. Caprice Wilson came of age in East Oakland in the 1980s when crack cocaine was just hitting the streets. For users, crack meant poverty, whole lives stripped down like a stolen car, the parts sold off to pay for their next hit. But for dope dealers, crack meant power and respect. Fat wads of paper money, gold chains, and gaudy jewelry, fancy cars. Everything was in the moment, Caprice says. No one thought about how it would affect our children. When she was 14, she saw a boy on a bike playing chicken with a car at the corner of 82nd Avenue and MacArthur Boulevard. The boy rode up close to the car, trying to freak out the driver. The driver swerved and tried to hit him. The boy on the bike dodged away and crashed into the curb, jumping over the bike and landing on his feet, grinning. "Damn, y'all see that?" he asked. "He almost hit me." His name was Lil Jerry, and he was 13. Caprice fell for him on the spot. The regard was mutual. Soon they were talking on the phone every night. When Caprice went to his house for the first time, his sisters told her Lil Jerry wouldn't stop talking about her. That's how she knew she was his girlfriend. Lil Jerry had been claiming East Oakland's 69ville gang since he was 5 or 6 years old. He'd started out earning petty cash by ironing and rubber banding wrinkled money from dice games, and then moved up in the organization. But even after he grew up to be 6'2", he was still known as Lil Jerry. By age 15, he was carrying around backpacks full of money. Too young to have a driver's license, he was already wealthy enough to own 4 or 5 cars. He liked to go to Las Vegas to watch the fights, wearing fur boxers and a long mink coat. 69ville was led by Felix Mitchell, who controlled much of the West Coast heroin market. He was arrested on federal charges in 1983 and sentenced to life in prison 2 years later. 14 months after that, he was stabbed to death by a fellow inmate at Leavenworth Penitentiary. His funeral made the national news, the casket conducted through the streets of Oakland on a horse-drawn carriage, followed by a procession of 4 Rolls-Royces, 10 white limousines, and an assortment of Cadillacs and Lincolns. Thousands of Oaklanders lined the streets to watch the 8-mile parade. Caprice's mother wouldn't let her go. She didn't know that it was too late to worry about Mitchell's bad example. Violence skyrocketed after Mitchell's death as other gangsters battled for a piece of his turf, as well as the increasingly lucrative crack trade. Year by year, the number of murders climbed steadily, from 114 in 1987 to 165 in 1992. The corpses weren't evenly distributed throughout the city, though. They were clustered on the east and west sides of town. East Oakland, in particular, was awash in crack, blood, and bullets. Caprice was living too fast a life to stay at home, so she moved in with her stepsister's family. One of the girls' chores was to clean the guns. When boys came over, Caprice and her stepsister would be sitting at a table with brush, rod, and cloth, expertly taking the guns apart, spinning the barrels, polishing the grips. A visitor would have to be pretty slow not to get the message. These girls were not to be played with. Lil Jerry called her Caprice Classic after the car. He owned one of those, too. She got a bit part in a Jim Belushi movie called The Principal, and Lil Jerry called her a movie star. She knew everybody, and everybody knew of her. Lil Jerry Cooper's beautiful, smart-alecky girlfriend. By the time I got to be 18 or 19, I thought I was like the princess of East Oakland, she says. Because 69ville was the gang that had all the hype. It was the most feared. Caprice's brother went off to college in Atlanta, but Caprice had no interest. She'd tried junior college, but couldn't be bothered to do more than cash the financial aid check. When her brother handed her an application packet for Clark Atlanta University, she threw it away. No way was she giving up her East Oakland status just to go to school. Then an acceptance letter arrived in the mail. Her brother had filled out the application for her and mailed it in. "You're going," Lil Jerry said when she told him. But Caprice had another plan. She wanted to get pregnant. She knew she and Jerry would have beautiful children together. "How are you going to support a baby?" Lil Jerry asked. Caprice shrugged. "I'll go on welfare." That's what all the girls she knew did. "You sound so stupid right now," Lil Jerry said. "You know what's going to happen. They're going to kill me, and I do not want to have a baby out here without a dad. I don't want that for you, and I don't want that for my child. There will be enough of those kids out there. You can take those ones in. Just know that those ones will be your and my children together, and when they get crazy and out of control, help them, because they're going to need help." Lil Jerry refused to sleep with her after that. "He froze me," Caprice says. "He was like, 'You're not messing with nobody else either. Try somebody else, I'll kill them, and I'll kill you first.'" So she went to college. She majored in education, ran track and got an athletics scholarship, won an award for Student Teacher of the Year from the Dean of the School of Education. Once, when she came home during break, she learned that Lil Jerry had been shot 3 times. She heard it from a friend. He hadn't told her, didn't want her to know. But when she held his hand, she could feel a bullet lodged beneath the skin. It was clear the thug life was wearing him down. The violence, the danger, the vigilance. "We just need to stop the madness," he would say. "Just stop the madness." He drank too much, smoked too much weed. He began dressing like he was a blue-collar worker, jackets from UPS and Home Depot, a back brace like he had a job in a warehouse. He was 24 years old. In their world, that made him practically an old man. One day, he got into a conversation with an elderly woman who lived on 89th Avenue, a couple of blocks from his house. She wouldn't go outside because of all the drug dealing in the neighborhood, but she told him she wished she could have flowers in her front yard. He bought her some and planted them himself, put a little gate around them so they wouldn't get trampled by the customers going to the house next door to buy drugs. Paid attention every time he passed her house on the way to the store, which is why he had to say something when he saw one of those drug customers take a shortcut across the garden. "Man, did you see the fence was there?" he asked. "Why would you walk across the flowers? Just walk around. She growing some flowers." "I don't give a fuck about them flowers," the guy said. He didn't know who Lil Jerry was, just some guy in a puffy jacket. "Why you gotta be like that? Just respect her flowers." Now it was a challenge. "Fuck them flowers," the guy said. "I'm gonna come back and shoot this shit up." And he did. Or someone did. Within hours, Lil Jerry was gunned down on the sidewalk. Caprice had left just a few minutes before. She'd been talking with Lil Jerry about what she was going to make for dinner. He said it sounded good. She'd promised to save him some. Afterwards, 2 things stuck in her mind. One was how neat the shooting had been. It wasn't one of the ones where blood went everywhere. There wasn't even a stain on the sidewalk. The other was how nobody on the block saw who did it. It wasn't like they were pretending they hadn't seen, the way people did when they didn't want to get involved. It was more like that bit from the Men in Black movies, where bystanders have their memories erased. It seemed to Caprice like Lil Jerry must have wanted it that way. "I don't want anybody to retaliate," she imagined him saying. "I just want to leave. I'm ready." The killing, like so many in East Oakland, was never solved. "That experience, it really grew me up and taught me a lot about life," she said, 20 years after Lil Jerry's murder. "Just appreciating the moment and doing the most you can do, to help somebody else." Within a year, she had her first job as an elementary school teacher in East Oakland. The troublesome kids kept getting sent her way, the ones who had been kicked out of other classrooms. She knew these kids, or she knew kids like them, and she knew how to work with them. They were her children, just like Lil Jerry had said. The best mother ever. At Oakland High School, Caprice served as a surrogate mom to the kids who needed one the most, the ones who had trouble just getting to school every day. Some of them, like Cherie, even called her mom, bringing her their grades, photographs, and artwork to hang on her walls, and writing her apologies when they ran into trouble. Her tiny office was papered with their missives. "From son Oscar, I love you, Mom," read one. "I'm sorry, Mom. She made me hecka mad," said another, written by a girl who had just gotten suspended for fighting. Caprice taught her kids to look out for one another, even when their inclination was to squabble. If a student wanted to be one of her children, they had to accept that they were gaining siblings as well as a mother. "We're family," she told them. "This is your sister. This is your brother. You have no say in the matter." On her wall, she'd posted the family slogan, "Never let your obstacles become more important than your goal." The goals: go to class, get your grades up, graduate, stay out of jail, survive. Her office was a safe zone for Richard. It was the size of a walk-in closet tucked off a hallway near the main office, but it had a couch where kids could sit and talk, take a breath, regroup, relax. He'd drop in during passing periods, just to touch base. He never wanted to get out of her office, Cherie remembers. I mean, he really loved her. Cherie was already one of Caprice's children. Caprice had helped her get off probation the year before, and she had never caught another case. Before long, Richard asked if he could call Caprice Mom too, but she wouldn't let him. He already had a mom he was close to. She wasn't going to try to take that spot. "I'll be your auntie," she told him. Hopes and prayers. Richard's mother, Jasmine, was already 4.5 months pregnant when her grandmother took her to the doctor to get checked. She was 14 years old and had been dating a boy 2 years older. He was the one who figured out she was pregnant. She hadn't known enough to make sense of the changes happening to her body. It was too late for an abortion, but Jasmine figured she was prepared to raise a child. She loved babysitting her niece and nephew. How hard could it be? "I thought it was about dressing them up and buying them clothes," she recalled. Richard was born the summer before Jasmine turned 15. She split up with his father 11 months later. Richard still saw him frequently over the years, or as frequently as he could, given that his father was sometimes in prison for drug offenses. When Richard was 5, Jasmine got involved with a new man, Derek. Richard was resentful, still holding out hope that his parents would get back together. "You're not my dad," he told Derek. Being a mother was harder than Jasmine had expected, but she took pains to do it well. Richard's temperament made it easier. He was a happy kid, always dancing and singing, playful and silly. She brought him to church every Sunday, taught him to recite his prayers and say grace before he ate, made sure he held the door open for women and seniors, minded his manners, was helpful around the house. Richard's friends knew his mom ran a tight ship. No disrespect, no talking back. Jasmine had 2 sisters, Juliet and Savannah, each of whom had children of their own. The 3 sisters were young and beautiful, with high foreheads, large almond-shaped eyes, and full Cupid's bow lips. There was always a lot of laughing when they were together. The kids moved easily among the sisters' houses, cocooned in the warmth of a large extended family. But on December 30th, 2006, when Richard was 9 years old, everything changed. A car parked in San Francisco was sprayed with bullets, killing 3 people inside. Savannah was one of them. She left behind 2 little girls, ages 4 and 11. They moved in with Richard, Jasmine, and Derek. Jasmine treated her nieces as daughters, but it was hard on everyone. The girls had lost their mother. Jasmine had lost her sister. And 9-year-old Richard had gone from being the center of his mother's world to just one more traumatized member of a family with a gaping hole in it. "I don't get any attention now," he told his mom. Jasmine tried to explain. "I know how I feel because it was my sister. You know how you feel because it was your auntie. But for them, it was their mom. And I have to share the love, you know? Even it out." 2 years later, Jasmine had a baby with Derek. The household now had 6 members: Derek and Jasmine, Richard and his new brother Darion, plus the 2 girls. They had moved into a 4-bedroom stucco bungalow in the far reaches of East Oakland's Elmhurst neighborhood. The house was pale pink and had rose bushes in the front yard. It was a tough neighborhood, but a quiet street. Jasmine had always hoped to continue her education, but it was a scramble just to get the bills paid and the children cared for and the house scrubbed and neat the way she liked it. No spots on the glass tabletop, no dust in the corners. When Richard was a junior in high school, she was working in food service at a residential care facility. She wanted something better for Richard. "I'm not making that much at my job," she said. "I want him to have a career, go to college." She hadn't saved much, but she figured if he started out at community college, he could transfer to a state school. These were big dreams in her part of town. Of the roughly 600 African-American boys who started Oakland high schools as freshmen each year, only about 300 ended up graduating. Fewer than 100 graduated with the requirements needed to attend a California state college or university. The odds of landing in the back of a police cruiser, on the other hand, were much better. African-American boys made up less than 30% of Oakland's underage population, but accounted for nearly 75% of all juvenile arrests. Jasmine worried about Richard, prayed he'd graduate from high school, prayed he wouldn't become a parent as early as she had, prayed he'd be safe from all the dangers that lurked for a young black man in Oakland: guns and crime and gangs and cops. Prayed he'd stay out of trouble. Prayed he'd survive. Where he left off. Richard brought Caprice his schoolwork to put up on the wall, just like the others did. His grades weren't great, but that wasn't the point. Getting a D was better than getting an F. "Next time it'll be a C," she told him. "Before long it'll be a B, and then you'll be making straight A's." When the 2 of them were alone, he confided in her about his life, replaying things that had happened and explaining how he'd do them differently now. Sometimes he'd tell her about a situation he was struggling with and ask for advice. But most of the time they weren't alone. Caprice had a lot of other children. When they were in the office, Richard sat and listened to them talk. He would make himself invisible, but he would observe and notice everything, Caprice says. A lot of times, students would come in here and he was like their little counselor. He would help them get through whatever was going on. He wanted people to be happy. That was the thing everybody noticed about him. He was always joking, goofing around. Caprice had a toy basketball hoop on her door to give her students' younger siblings something to do when their parents came in for meetings. She usually kept it pinned up so the bigger kids wouldn't use it, because when they did, things tended to get out of hand. Richard would shoot balled-up paper through it on the sly, making sure Caprice noticed. "Did you see that bird, Miss Caprice?" If the mood in the room was tense, he might suddenly pull his pants up high above his waist like a nerd to get people giggling. "There's already enough craziness," he told Caprice. "I just like happy stuff." That's how everyone knew Richard, as the funny one, the one who made people smile. He pulled pranks like putting ketchup on people's faces while they slept, or ambushing them with water balloons when they'd just woken up. He would do anything for a laugh, put on one of his female cousins' sexy cropped sweaters, for example, or post a selfie on Instagram of himself dressed in a bra and a wig, gazing into the bathroom mirror with a sultry expression. "I'm a thought for Halloween," the caption explained. That fall, Jasmine was planning a family trip to Disneyland. "You might not have fun because you're a big kid now," she told Richard. "That wouldn't be a problem," he assured her. "I'm going to have fun like I'm 5 years old." He'd lost a year of his childhood, his cousin Gerald pointed out later. He'd only just come back after being sent away. He didn't really get to experience the fun time. He's probably like living from where he left off. How it was before. Sometimes when Cherie thinks about her old friends, her eyes fill up with tears. "I'm not going to say we were angels," she says. "I'm not going to say we were scholars. But we all had good hearts. We looked out for each other because that was all we knew." She was talking about 2012, the year she and Richard were freshmen in high school, before everything went bad. In those days, they cut school on the daily, heading to the intersection of Fruitvale Avenue and MacArthur Boulevard, where kids gathered from all over town in the afternoons to talk and flirt and play dice, occasionally to fight. They had a crew they called the Heartbreak Kids, not a gang, but a play gang, a set of initials to write down in jagged letters, HBK. They went bowling, they went to the beach, they rode the bus all over town, stopping in at high schools where they didn't even go to school, just to visit whoever might be hanging around the halls. They knew everyone, it seemed, everyone from the east side anyway, but they loved one another best. They'd grown up together, and now they were in high school, full of sass and fire. Skeet and Ashley were the oldest at 16, Jessie was 15, Cherie, Hadari, and Day were 14, so was Richard, though he seemed younger. Skeet used to take up for him, Cherie remembered. Richard was like a little brother. He was the youngest one. Him and Hadari, but Hadari, he brave-hearted. He didn't take too much from nobody. But Richard, like everybody just watch him. Richard's hecka goofy and hecka obnoxious and would do something stupid. He would do the craziest stuff. Back then, they had their whole lives ahead of them, or so they thought. It wasn't supposed to turn out like it did, which is why the tears keep leaking from her eyes as she talks. She never dreamed it would turn out like it did. At the time, they were beautiful, they were young, and they had one another. And it was fun. Not gonna lie. In those days, it was hecka fun. Fighting. They wanted to go to the beach. It wasn't particularly warm, maybe 70 degrees, if that, but they were bored, and so they went. Richard, Cherie, Day, Skeet, Hadari, Jessie, and Ashley, all of them on the bus to the beach. It was April 2012. The way Cherie remembers it, they got off at Fruitvale to change buses, but Ashley wasn't paying attention. "Ashley! Come on, Ashley! We've missed the bus!" Turns out there was another girl on the bus named Ashley. She and her friend got off the bus behind them. "Why y'all following us?" Ashley demanded. "What y'all want?" That was just what they did in those days, argued. Now Ashley and other Ashley were arguing, and Day was arguing with other Ashley's friend. "Come on," Cherie called. "They don't want no problems." The argument seemed pointless to her, stupid. They were trying to get to the beach. But then, according to Cherie, Ashley hit other Ashley, and the fight began for real. Cherie tried to break it up and got hit, so she hit back. Then Richard tried to break it up, but he got hit too. In the tussle that followed, something fell out of other Ashley's bag, insulin and needles. Richard picked them up and tried to hand them to her, but she threw them at him, and so they all just took off, laughing and breathless. She was so hyphy. Why'd she have all them needles? She must have diabetes. I tried to give it back to her. Oh, well. They ended up in a park, Cherie remembers. Scrubby grass, a soccer field, tennis courts. There were some Latino kids there, skateboarders. How the boys ended up fighting them was a mystery to Cherie, but that's what happened. Somebody spoke to somebody wrong, and then Skeet and Hadari were fighting, and Richard joined in because if his friends were fighting, he'd fight too. Skeet hit one of the kids with a skateboard. It was hecka savage, Cherie said later. Then they went to the beach, ran around in the sand, talked about what had happened, partied, adrenaline pumping, laughing, bleeding a little. On the way home, the bus went down Fruitvale. Looking through the windows, they saw the girls they'd fought with and the skateboarders from the park. "Look, there they are. They're talking to the police." Then a cruiser pulled up behind the bus. Arrested. "We were just young," Cherie explained. "We didn't even think we could go to jail for it. Honestly, we didn't think about jail when it happened." But the law didn't see it that way. The police arrested Richard, Cherie, Day, Skeet, Hadari, and Ashley. Jesse had already gotten off the bus by then, so he got away. The rest of them kept waiting to go home, but they weren't allowed to go home. Juvenile records are sealed, so it's impossible to reconstruct exactly what went down. But it appears that the skateboarders said some of their stuff was missing, including a cell phone. Nothing was found on Richard and his friends, but charges were brought. Sometime after midnight, they were booked into juvenile hall. That's where they stayed, distributed across separate units. Juvenile hall policy doesn't let kids who are arrested together stay together, both so they don't have a chance to compare stories and to keep them from getting into any more trouble. The first time they went to court for a detention hearing, Richard got all goofy, excited to be reunited with his friends, sure that when the court appearance was over, they would get to go home. But that's not what happened. There's no bail for juvenile offenders. It's up to the judge to decide whether to let you go home or keep you in custody. When there's violence involved, they tend to keep you. Hadari had known. He was the only one of them who'd ever been arrested before. He said, "We're not getting out of jail. Don't even think that." And he was right. Cherie recalls that they were in custody for a time, and then one by one they went their separate ways. Cherie got out on probation, a GPS monitor on her ankle. Skeet and Hadari were sentenced to out-of-home placement and sent to group homes, where they would have to complete formal treatment programs before returning to their families. Richard was released on GPS early on, but eventually he was sentenced to a group home in Redding, California, a 3.5-hour drive from Oakland. He would stay there until the following summer, more than a year after his arrest. The 6 kids would never all be together again. After that, everything went wrong instead of right. Now it's a good day. Skeet was an extrovert, a goofball, a practical joker. People remembered him after they met him. They remembered his quick wit, his energy, his magnetism, his loyalty, and if they got on the wrong side of it, his temper. He was the one who could do a backflip off a traffic barrier, the one who sauntered on and off the debate team at Skyline High School, sometimes showing up, sometimes not, but always quick on his feet, leading with his wit and his gift of gab, even if he couldn't be bothered with the preparation. Skeet was sent to Boys Republic, a residential treatment facility for troubled youths in Chino Hills, California. It's not clear how long he was supposed to stay there, but he ran away and returned to Oakland long before his time was up. On November 26, 2012, he posted a sepia-toned photo of himself on Facebook. He was sitting in a car, head tilted back to look down at the camera, his eyes hooded. He had a gun in his right hand. "What is that?" someone queried. "Trey 8, Skeet wrote, meaning that it was a .38 caliber revolver. "But this, before I went to jail." "You out for good?" To myself, "Yeah, but to the police, they want a nigga." He'd run away from the group home and was back in Oakland. The day before he posted the gun photo, he'd posted a photo of himself with a bottle of cognac and a bottle of cough syrup. "Got my syrup and my Remy. Now it's a good day." Now he posted a picture of himself drinking straight from the bottle. Big boy drinking. That was his last Facebook post. On the afternoon of January 7th, 2013, more than a month after running away from the group home, he was shot multiple times while driving a car near Hagenberger Road and Hamilton Street. He was 17 years old. The man police blame for his murder was killed 4 days later in an outbreak of violence that left 4 people dead in one 6-hour period. When Richard heard about his friend's death, he called his mother from the group home in Redding to find out if it was true. When she said it was, he began to cry and couldn't stop. He didn't even hang up, just put the phone down and walked away. If. Everything turned dark then. Skeet dead, Skeet dead, Skeet dead. "That killed Richard," Cherie said later. "It killed all of us." She didn't have an explanation for his murder, except the usual. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong company. Skeet was 2 years older than she and Richard were. After he ran away from his Southern California group home, he took up with other, more dangerous friends. "I keep thinking," Cherie says, "if we'd never got into that fight, maybe Skeet would still be alive." It was an open casket funeral. Cherie says she almost passed out when she saw Skeet lying dead in his coffin. People had to hold her up. But at least she wasn't alone. Richard, in a group home 3.5 hours away, had no one beside him to keep him from falling. No one who knew Skeet. No one who understood. Murder. In 2012, Oakland was the most dangerous city in California. According to Oakland Police Department statistics, there were nearly 2,800 assaults and more than 4,100 robberies. In all, 131 people were killed. 8 of them were under 18. Lamont Price, killed February 16, 2012, age 17, shot. Charles Hill III, killed March 23, 2012, age 16, shot. Shantae Daniels Jr., killed April 21, 2012, age 15, shot. Hadari Asghari, killed July 10, 2012, age 15, shot. Tatiana Turner, killed August 8, 2012, age 16, shot. Bobby Sartain, killed November 25, 2012, age 16, shot. Raquel Gerstel, killed November 25, 2012, age 15, shot. Jubril Jordan, killed December 30th, 2012, age 15, shot. Richard and Cherie didn't know the Hadari who was killed, but they were friends with Charles Hill. He was killed at a party out by 68th Avenue. Cherie was there the night it happened, but she'd gotten spooked by all the guns at the party and left. She could feel death in the air. She walked down to the corner and called Day in tears. "Come get me," she pleaded. "Somebody's about to die." By the time Day arrived, Charles was dead. Skeet was the first murder of 2013. There would be another 91 people killed before the year was out. 7 of the people who were shot were younger than 18, including an 8-year-old girl and a 16-month-old boy. Every year we lose somebody, Cherie says. It's just like, who's next? I'm scared for myself because bullets don't have no names on them. That's why I don't go outside. There's too much going on. Richard had lost 2 aunts to murder, his mother's sister, Savannah, and his father's sister, Tish, who was killed by her boyfriend in 2008. Now he'd lost 2 of his friends. Violence was like the fog that swept in from San Francisco Bay on summer afternoons to cloak the city in damp shadow. Even in the bright sunshine, you knew it could roll in at any minute and chill you to the bone. Working. Richard returned to Oakland the following summer, having spent all of sophomore year in Redding. Jasmine was delighted to have him home. She'd visited him regularly while he was away and talked with him on the phone, but it had been hard on both of them. Now it was time for a fresh start. Richard signed up for a job training program conducted by the Unity Council, an Oakland nonprofit which led to an internship. The workshop facilitator, Josue Guzman, noticed that Richard stood out from the other young participants. He was smart and focused and a quick study, and he seemed to be enjoying himself. Richard loved having a job. He was conscientious about arriving promptly, and he took care with his work, doing things right the first time, and stepping in to fix mistakes made by other interns. Once, Guzman asked Richard to help him with a project another intern hadn't completed, organizing some notes Guzman had jotted down on a notepad about the summer workshop and turning them into an organized lesson plan. Richard took the scattered, out-of-order notes, typed them, and arranged them into easy-to-follow lessons. Guzman was impressed. Richard really did amazing work during his internship, he wrote in a letter. I'm confident when I say that he has the potential to achieve anything that he wants. Jasmine noticed how much more grown-up Richard seemed now that he was working. He offered to help out with the bills instead of spending his earnings on himself. He liked being a man with a paycheck. Stripped. It was the end of October, 2 months into Richard's junior year. He and his cousin Gerald were on their way over to Cherie's house to kick it with her brother, and they stopped in at a liquor store to get something to drink. That's when Richard ran into a boy he knew from around the way. A few minutes later, 2 guns to his head. Gerald wasn't walking in front, so he didn't see what happened. But suddenly, Richard wasn't wearing his pink Nike Foamposites anymore. Richard's face was crimson, the way it always got when he was furious. In Oakland, it's called getting stripped. The kid took his wallet, money, phone, shoes, coat. Gerald wanted to go back, find the kids who did it, but Richard told him to keep walking. He'd been caught without his people. That's all there was to say. But at least he hadn't been killed. Rumor was that the boy who robbed him had killed people. Trust issues. Who in this world can you trust? when the guns are drawn, when the sun goes down, when you're walking in the shadows, who can you trust? People call themselves your friend. They say they were there, but they weren't there. Say they're coming, but they don't show. Say they got your back as they get their knives out. Two tongues in their mouths, the one they use to promise and the one they use to lie. I don't have any friends, Richard once said. I have associates. Resolve. After he was robbed, Richard didn't come to school for a few days. When he returned, he sat in Caprice's office and told her what had happened. He seemed pensive and a little shaken. The whole time the guns were pointed at him, he said, he'd stayed calm, observing, trying to figure out how not to have the situation escalate, how not to die. Then Richard gave Caprice his mother's phone number. The type of character you have and the type of character my mama has, you could almost be friends, he said. Caprice laughed. Richard, you know if I become friends with your mom and I'm working here at school, that means she's going to know every single thing that you're doing because I'm going to tell her. I want you to do that, Richard said, because I already have a bad rap, and I want her to know that I'm really trying to do everything I can to not be like that. I'm a graduate, and I'm going to make her happy. Part 3. The Fire. Monday, November 4th, 2013. A week or so after Richard was robbed, Jasmine came into his room to talk to him as he got ready for school. She was concerned about his schoolwork. He complained sometimes that his classes didn't make sense. Now she told him he needed to talk to his teachers. You have to ask for help, she said. That afternoon, Richard's cousin Lloyd came by Oakland High looking for him. A heavy, bespectacled kid with a gap between his front teeth, Lloyd was goofy and boisterous, qualities that made him unpopular with the school's security staff. He was 2 years older than Richard, but he didn't act it. Just a big old baby, campus security officer Carlita Collins says. A big, rambunctious ball of energy. I always make Lloyd leave whenever I see him here. Richard and Lloyd were always together. Lloyd spent a lot of time at Richard's house since his own mother was often out of town. Richard looked up to him. He would always be with him, Lloyd's brother Gerald remembers. It was just Lloyd and Richard. He was always following behind Lloyd. That afternoon, Lloyd wanted Richard to leave school early, but Richard wouldn't do it. So Lloyd hung around outside the gates until Richard was out of school. Bye, Auntie, Richard said to Collins as he left. He opened his arms and gave her a hug. He's a beautiful young man, Collins said later. I'm telling you, I didn't feel nothing but love when he hugged me. The 57 bus. Sasha's bus ride to and from Maybeck High School took an hour and involved as many as 2 transfers. But Sasha didn't mind. They had always loved the bus. Loved the intersecting lines of transit routes on the map, the crisp procession of times on the schedule. In their spare time, they drew maps of new bus, subway, and streetcar lines, or read up on historical public transit systems. Sasha loves buses in a way I can't even understand, explains Healy. I don't even like buses. They love buses. They like reading things about buses. You can offer them a ride home, and they're like, I'll take the bus. Most days after school, Sasha and their best friend Michael walked together from Maybeck to the BART station on College Avenue, about a mile away. Along the way, they'd pass a manhole cover on which someone had spray-painted, "Do not eat this." Usually, one of them would point out the instruction to the other, "Hey, don't eat that." Most of the time, they split up when they got to the BART station. Michael would take the BART train, and Sasha would take the bus. Sometimes, when they arrived at the station, the train would already be there. "Dude, I got this," Michael always said, a joking reference to the impossibility of sprinting upstairs to the platform in time to catch the train. It didn't really make sense. It just seemed funny. They weren't really dude-type people. After that, Sasha would walk across the street to pick up the first of 2 buses that would take them home. The 57 was the second. In the afternoon, it was usually packed with students from a dozen different elementary, middle, and high schools. On game days, the kids from rival high schools razzed each other back and forth. It was loud, obnoxious, rowdy. The kids were tired, wired, just sprung from school. The adults looked out the window or studied their phones, tried not to make eye contact. The bus felt charged with daredevil energy, hot, muggy, and musky with adolescent bodies. The first question you faced when getting on was where to sit. Up front, close to the driver? It felt safer there, if the chaos made you nervous. That's where girls tended to sit. In the back, out of sight, more room to spread out. You might even get a seat to yourself. Sasha liked the back of the bus, a platform seat they could spread out on, tuck their legs under. There they could read, do homework, nap. They had trained themselves to wake as the bus rounded the sharp S-curve just before their stop. On November 4th, they were unusually tired, having stayed up late the night before writing a paper for Russian Lit. Less than 24 hours earlier, they'd shared their exhaustion on Tumblr. Do you ever just get really tired when you have a lot of shit to do and you just start crying for no reason? Now, as the 57 bus rattled up MacArthur Boulevard, Sasha's eyes drifted closed. 4:52 p.m. Every AC transit bus is equipped with cameras that continuously record sound and video from multiple vantage points. The 57 bus was no exception. The cameras recorded Lloyd and Richard climbing on at the front a little before 5 p.m., and walking down the aisle toward the back, Lloyd chubby in a zipped-up black hoodie, Richard lean in a black hoodie over a white T-shirt and an orange-billed New York Knicks hat. The bus was a double-length one, 2 buses fused together like conjoined twins by an accordion-pleated rubber seam. Most of the seats were taken. An older woman who wanted to talk to the bus driver about her route. A mom holding the hand of a little girl in a pink hoodie. A gaggle of laughing teenage boys. "How's everything?" the driver asked a middle-aged man as he slid his bus pass into the machine. "Long day," the man replied, shaking his head. Richard recognized a boy named Jamal sitting at the back of the bus and greeted him with a dap. "Malie B!" Lloyd shouted, following suit. "What's up, dude?" Jamal was tall and lanky. He wore jeans and a white hoodie with a thick horizontal black stripe across the shoulders. His voice was low and thick, faded. As the bus started up again, the 2 cousins gripped the silver pole in front of Jamal. Behind them, Sasha slept. A paperback copy of Anna Karenina lay closed in their lap. Their skirt, gauzy and white, dangled over the edge of the seat. It couldn't have been easy to sleep with Lloyd nearby. He bounced up and down trying to make the bus shake, rapped a snippet of the song Started from the Bottom by Drake, screeched random words like chinchilla and obituary. He shouted down the aisle to a girl he'd noticed when they'd climbed on board. "Hey, girl! Excuse me!" A girl in blue basketball shorts turned to look at him. "No, your friend, the light-skinned one." Jamal pointed at Sasha, whispered, "Look at this dude." Lloyd turned and looked over his shoulder. He cackled. On the video, you can't hear what Jamal says as he hands Richard the lighter, but you can see him take out his iPhone and point it toward Sasha as if planning to record. Later, Richard would say that it was supposed to be funny, like that prank show on MTV with Ashton Kutcher, Punk'd. He thought the fabric would smolder for a minute, and then Sasha would wake up and slap it out, startled. "I need a good laugh," he'd said, just after getting on the bus. Now he showed the lighter to Lloyd, and then swung to the opposite side of the silver pole, closer to Sasha. He flicked the lighter by the hem of Sasha's skirt. Nothing happened. Lloyd was still shouting up to the front of the bus. "Hey, light-skinned girl. Light-skinned girl." Jamal kept repeating what Lloyd said, his deep voice like an echo from the bottom of a well. Lloyd bounced up the aisle to where the girls were sitting, perching on the edge of a nearby seat. "Go ahead, you do it," Jamal said to Richard. Richard flicked the lighter again. Nothing. Rebuffed by the girls, Lloyd returned to his companions, stopping in front of Sasha's sleeping form to shout an abrupt, parrot-like, "Hey!" Sasha stirred, but didn't wake. "Whoa, nigga. You said, hey," Jamal echoed, "screaming and shit." Lloyd leaned close and screeched in Jamal's ear. Richard laughed and slapped Lloyd's head. "Aw, nigga, you just broke my neck," Lloyd yelled. "Damn, pussy, bitch, fuck." Richard brandished the lighter, pretending to light Lloyd's sleeve. He looked at Jamal. "Do it," Jamal urged. Lloyd danced between them, landing half on Jamal's lap. "Move, nigga, get off me," Jamal grumbled. He kept his eyes on Richard, his phone poised. "You might as well do it," he said again. Richard slunk back to Sasha, flicked the lighter. Nothing. He glanced at Jamal, grinned, and flicked the lighter a fourth time. "Back door! Back door!" Lloyd called to the driver, ready for them to make their escape. The doors opened. Richard leaped off the bus. Lloyd started to follow. Then he looked back and stopped, transfixed, as Sasha's skirt erupted into a sheet of flame. When the doors closed again, he hadn't moved. Fire. The next few seconds of the surveillance video are hard to watch. Sasha leaps up, slapping the flaming skirt. Oh, fuck, oh, fuck. The skirt looks unearthly, impossible, a ball of white fire. "Ow, ow," Sasha screams, voice high and terrified. "I'm on fire. I'm on fire." Their hands snatch at the skirt, shaking it, waving it. Specks of flaming fabric swirl through the air. Sasha runs for the door and finds it closed. They turn, dance in place, screaming. Jamal howls with laughter. Then, as Sasha careens toward him, he cringes and climbs onto his seat. "He's on fire," he yells. "Put him out." Passengers sprint for the exits, shrieking and coughing. "It's a fire! It's a fire!" Some of the other kids on the bus are giggling. The bus is still moving, the driver just starting to register that something is going on way back at the far end of his vehicle. "I ain't got no time to be playing with y'all, man," he calls over his shoulder. Near the middle of the bus, two men leap from their seats and elbow through the press of people trying to escape. One man is short and balding, the other is taller, with a walrusy mustache and sad, basset hound eyes. "Get down," the mustached one yells. "Get on the ground." The two men don't know each other, but they work in unison, shoving Sasha to the floor. The mustached man smothers Sasha's flaming skirt with his coat, while the balding man stamps out the burning tatters that flame around them. It's over in seconds. The driver pulls the bus to the curb. Sasha scrambles to a standing position, dazed and in shock. "Oh, Lord. Fuck." "That boy was on fire, wasn't he?" a man remarks as Sasha pushes through the back doors to the sidewalk. Behind him, Sasha's mustached rescuer paces the aisle. "Call an ambulance," he croaks. He goes to the door of the bus and calls to Sasha, who roams the sidewalk with a cell phone, charred legs. "You need to call an ambulance, man." The girl in the blue basketball shorts calls to Sasha through the doors of the bus. "Are you okay?" Sasha doesn't answer. The bus empties out. Passengers climb off, shaking their heads. That don't make no sense. That's really damn sad. See how he burned all up? Oh my God, who would want to do some shit like that? Oh, they got him messed up. That's fucked up. That's hella fucked up. Then the driver walks down the aisle to the back of the bus and kicks the charred remnant of Sasha's skirt through the door. Real stupid motherfuckers, man. He bellows. Watching. After he jumped off the bus, Richard strode away with his hands in his pockets, trying to look casual. Then he heard Sasha's screams. He stopped, turned around, went back. He stared at the bus, mouth open. The bus had begun to move again. The driver, still unaware of the fire, was continuing along his route. Richard ran after the bus. Suddenly, it lurched to the curb. Passengers spilled out, yelling and coughing. Another bus, the NL, had pulled up behind it, and after a moment, Richard turned around and climbed on. A few seconds later, he got off again and walked back to where Sasha now paced the sidewalk on bare, charred legs. He ambled past, snaking his head to stare at Sasha, then turned around and walked past Sasha again, still staring. Then Jamal and Lloyd got off the 57, and the three of them half walked, half ran to the other bus. That night, Jasmine noticed that Richard seemed sad. "What's wrong?" she asked. He wouldn't tell her. The man with the mustache. After the police arrived, the man with the mustache walked home, tears streaming down his face. He was in shorts and a button-up shirt, his jacket charred from smothering the flames. Why? He kept asking himself. Oh my God, why? Phone call. The school day was long over at 5 o'clock, but Carl was still in his classroom when Sasha called him on his cell phone. "Dad, I need you to come over here right now. I was on the bus and I got set on fire." "What?" Carl said. The reception was terrible. "Say it again." "You have to pick me up and take me to the hospital because someone set me on fire." Carl was sure he wasn't hearing right. He walked around his classroom, closing windows and gathering his things. "Wait, say it again? You were on the bus and what happened?" "I need to go to the hospital now." And then Carl was running, still on the phone with Sasha, still asking the same question over and over, as his feet carried him block after block, down one street and up another, until he reached the place where Sasha lay on the sidewalk in their underwear, shivering and hyperventilating. "Tell me again, what happened?" Most of the passengers had dispersed by now, but a few lingered with the driver on the sidewalk beside the empty bus. One of them, a teenage girl, had called her mother, who had called 911. The girl's mother arrived before the ambulance did. She stood with her arm around her daughter as Carl called Debbie and told her there had been an accident. When Debbie got there, she thought Sasha must have fallen in mud, because why else would their legs have those black splotches? And then she understood and began to sob. "Well," Sasha said, "it came true. What you were always worried about." The ambulance took a long time to arrive. The police, on the other hand, came right away. "Do you know who did this to you?" the officers kept asking Sasha. "No." Sasha's teeth were chattering. "I was asleep." They had never been so cold. Their legs were naked to the November chill. More than naked, skinless, exposed. Carl took off the Outback hat he always wore and used it to shield Sasha's crotch from the eyes of passers-by. "Don't you have anything to keep him warm?" Debbie asked the cops, forgetting all about Sasha's pronouns. A police officer brought a sheet of yellow plastic from the squad car, the kind usually used for covering corpses. Debbie didn't want to put it over the open wounds on Sasha's legs, so she wrapped it around their shoulders. At last, after maybe 45 minutes, the ambulance arrived. Paramedics loaded Sasha onto a gurney and hooked up an IV. Warm fluids flowed into Sasha's veins. Morphine. The pain and cold receded. They were safe, alive. Everything would be okay. Carl climbed in the front of the ambulance that took Sasha to the hospital. There wasn't room for Debbie. She stood on the sidewalk and wept as they drove away. Everyone had left, except the teenage girl and her mother. They did it because he was wearing a skirt, Debbie sobbed. Together, the girl and her mother wrapped Debbie in their arms. "That's no reason," they said. The Rimfire's Revenge. Sasha was giddy in the emergency room, talking, joking, high on morphine. "It's the Rimfire's revenge," they told the doctors, remembering how they had been evacuated from the fire in Yosemite with Nemo. Debbie and Carl had never seen them so social. "Everybody's so nice," Sasha gushed. "They're taking such good care of me." Sasha had been taken to St. Francis Memorial Hospital in San Francisco so that they could be admitted into the Bothan Burn Center, a specialized unit that treats burn victims from around the Bay Area. Dr. Richard F. Grossman, one of the burn center's surgeons, came to the emergency room to assess the situation. The wounds on Sasha's legs were a collage of colors: red, pink, black, and yellow. But what Dr. Grossman noted immediately was that many of them were white, a leathery, colorless char that looked like overcooked tuna. That signaled third-degree burns, in which the skin has burned all the way through, down to the fat below. From the emergency room, Sasha was taken to the burn unit. The first stop was an enormous stainless steel tub filled with a solution of diluted bleach. Infection is one of the leading causes of death for burn victims. It was there, naked in the tub, that Sasha began to understand the severity of their injuries. Their legs were unrecognizable, weirdly colored, charred, and flaking. Dr. Grossman estimated that the burns covered 22% of Sasha's body. Still, he was reassuring when he met with Debbie and Carl. The burns were very deep, he said, but they were treatable. In the years he'd been at the Bothan Burn Center, he had seen much, much worse. "We have people die here every few days," he explained later. "I knew Sasha would not be one of them." The 10 o'clock news. Every night, Caprice watched the 10 o'clock news. It was part of her preparation for the next day at school. If someone had gotten shot in Oakland, odds were that somebody at Oakland High School would be connected, affected, or implicated. That night, the news reported that a man had been set on fire on the 57 bus. She shook her head. Who would do something like that? She wondered. Locked out. Caprice got a call from a teacher the next morning saying one of her children wanted to be excused from class. Then Richard got on the phone. "I really need to talk to you." Caprice couldn't imagine what was so urgent that it couldn't wait until class was over. "Come in at lunchtime," she said. He was there at lunchtime, but her office was filled with kids. She could tell he wanted to talk in private, but clearing the office wasn't easy. One girl didn't want to leave, and Caprice had to physically escort her out of the office through an antechamber and into the main hallway. As she did, she heard the door click behind her. She was locked out. Her keys and phone were sitting on her desk. Annoyed, she walked down the hallway to the main office and threaded her way between desks to the back of the room. There, she dug out the key to a side door that opened into her office. The whole journey couldn't have taken more than a few minutes, but when she stepped back into her office, Richard was gone. She found him outside, being led away in handcuffs by 2 uniformed police officers. She never learned what he'd wanted to tell her. Maybeck. When Sasha didn't show up at school the next day, Nemo was concerned. They asked around, did anyone know where Sasha was? A student who was a neighbor of Sasha's had heard they were in the hospital but didn't know why. Nemo called the house. No answer. Then they called Carl's cell phone, voice shaking. Is Sasha okay? Debbie and Carl were at the hospital. They told Nemo what had happened, the fire, the burns. The surgeon said the prognosis was good. Carl assured Nemo. Sasha would be okay, but they were going to be in the hospital for at least a couple of weeks. Tell them I love them, Nemo said before hanging up. Nemo told Michael. Michael told Healy. Healy told Taya. The friends huddled together, shaken and in tears. As news spread, life at school came to a halt. It was unfathomable. How could such a thing happen in the queer-friendly Bay Area? We were all liberal hippie teenagers, so we didn't even think of that happening, Healy says. But it had. Someone had set Sasha on fire. Inevitably, thoughts turned to the person who had done it. Hate him, Healy says. Hate his guts. Shyam. Shyam Sundar was the science teacher at Maybeck. A burly, bearded man with a reputation for academic toughness, Shyam taught biology, chemistry, and organic chemistry, and was somewhat of a legend among the students. There was a card in the index card game titled Shyam. The instructions were, imitate Shyam as best you can, child. Shyam called them all child. Sasha was his favorite student. A scholar, Shyam called Sasha, the highest compliment he could give. Not a scholar in training, a scholar. On his way to work on November 5th, Shyam heard on the radio that someone had been set on fire on the bus. But it wasn't until Sasha didn't show up at school that he learned what had happened. He doesn't remember exactly how he found out. In fact, he doesn't remember much of anything. The whole week is blocked out from my memory, he says. In his 15 years of teaching, he had never let anything get in the way of his work. Even when his grandmother died, he got the news in the middle of a lecture and kept right on teaching. To me, that's what she would have wanted, he explains. To me, teaching is sacred. But after Sasha was burned, he couldn't teach. He still showed up every day, but he just handed out worksheets to his students. Sasha had always sat in the same seat. Now that seat was empty. Shyam found he couldn't even look at that part of the classroom. The students who sat there, he says, got no eye contact from me whatsoever. I knew my baby. Jasmine was watching television when she saw that police had arrested a suspect in the bus passenger burning that had been all over the news. The newscaster didn't say a name, nor did the broadcast show the suspect's face, but Jasmine's heart began pounding all the same. The TV showed the boy's back as he was marched in handcuffs up the steps of the police department. White jeans, black hoodie, the same clothes Richard had worn to school that morning. I knew my baby as soon as I seen him, she said. As soon as I saw his body, I saw his structure. I knew exactly who it was. She called Caprice, who confirmed that Richard had been arrested. Then she began calling everyone she could think of, Richard's father, his probation officer, the police station. No one could tell her where he was. And so she sat and watched the news and waited for someone to contact her. Richard never called. He called his father instead, maybe because he didn't want to face his mother's disappointment. By the time Jasmine was allowed to see him 6 days later, the district attorney had decided to charge Richard as an adult, and his name was all over the news. The Interview, Part 1. When Richard arrived at the police station on the day of his arrest, the officers placed him in interview room 202 and instructed him to remove his shoelaces, belt, bandana, and the cord from his hoodie. Then they left him there. The room was small and shabby, containing only a rectangular table and 3 chairs with blue plastic seats. The plaster was pitted and peeling. Pieces littered the floor as if someone had recently punched the wall and no one had bothered sweeping up afterward. Richard leaned forward and rested his forehead on the edge of the table. Minutes ticked by. He sat up and rubbed his eyes with 2 fingers, leaned back in the chair and stared at the floor, leaned forward with his chin resting on his arms, cradled his head in his hand, sat up and rested his chin in his palms. 10 minutes went by, then 20, 30. After an hour, an officer peeked in to hand him a bag lunch. He unpacked it, a soda, a turkey sandwich, a bag of Sun chips. He smoothed the paper bag flat and placed the sandwich on top. Then he folded his hands and bowed his head. He crossed himself 3 times. Then he ate the sandwich. He had his head down on the table when officers Anwan Jones and Jason Anderson came in, 2 hours and 19 minutes after he'd first been placed in the room. They moved him into the center seat and settled themselves on either side of him. "You didn't eat all your chips, man?" Officer Jones asked. He was tall and African-American, with a shaved head, glasses, and an easy, sympathetic manner. "I was getting a little stomach ache," Richard said. The officers assured him that they wanted to keep things relaxed. They asked about Richard's life, where he lived, what sports he played. "How are you doing in school?" Officer Jones asked. "I was doing okay," Richard admitted. "But then it started falling off. The school's not good for me. There's too many distractions. I need to go to a smaller environment where I can focus." "A lot of kids wouldn't understand that," Officer Jones said, nodding. "I had the same issue when I was younger." "Any girlfriend right now?" asked Officer Anderson. He was white and heavy-set, and though he smiled a lot, his friendliness seemed forced. "I've been looking," Richard said. "Looking?" Anderson grinned. "On the prowl." "It's not looking too good," Richard said. "Were there girls up in Reading?" Anderson asked. "They cool?" Richard looked puzzled. He'd been in a group home up there, he explained, and hadn't been allowed to mix with girls. Jones sat with one hand resting on his knee, the other on his writing pad. "Did you learn something in the group home? Did you learn some important lessons being away from your family?" "It was hard," Richard admitted. "It took me actually a while. And then I was doing good. And then my best friend since forever, my best friend ever, he passed. And then I had a little breakdown." "What happened to your friend?" Jones asked. "He was murdered." As the conversation continued, Richard was candid, almost confiding. He told them about getting robbed, about how he'd been set up by someone he'd called a friend. "I have trust issues right now," he told the officers. "Well, here's the deal," Officer Jones said at last. "I'm going to explain to you why you're in here. We have some questions we wanted to ask you so we can get your side of the story, your version of what transpired. But before we get into that, I need to read you your rights." Miranda warning. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to talk to a lawyer and have him present with you while you are being questioned. If you cannot afford a lawyer, one will be appointed to represent you before any questioning. Do you understand the rights I have explained to you? "Why did you talk?" Jasmine asked Richard later. "You should have waited until you talked to either me or your father or a lawyer." But studies show that more than 90% of juveniles who are interrogated by police don't wait to talk to an attorney and don't understand the rights the police have read them. They do what Richard did. They talk. Kids are not going to spontaneously ask for a parent, explains Barry Feld, a law professor at the University of Minnesota and one of the nation's leading experts on juvenile justice. They're embarrassed, they're ashamed, They're thinking in their adolescent brains that somehow their parents won't find out. They're thinking, how do I get out of here? They read him his rights and they asked him, did he understand? He didn't understand, Jasmine says. And I know he didn't understand because I could barely understand. When we're in court, I don't know nothing until the lawyer tells me. The Interview, Part 2. You have a pretty good memory, right? Officer Jones asked when he finished reading Richard his rights. Give me the rundown of what you were doing, say, yesterday after, say, school. From the time school got out till, say, about 8 to 9 o'clock at night. Richard told him about Lloyd meeting him at the gate at the end of the school day, and about going with him to get a phone from someone, a process that had taken close to 2 hours. Then he described getting on the bus and how there was a man on the bus wearing a skirt. He'd just gotten off the 57 bus to get the express bus, he said, when he heard screams and ran back. When they opened the door to the bus, he saw that the man's skirt was on fire. What do you think about dudes who dress up in skirts? Jones asked. I'm not with that, Richard said. I wouldn't say that I hate gay people, but I'm very homophobic. Jones nodded. Okay. Why would you call yourself homophobic? I don't have no problem with somebody if they like men, but like if you do too much? Nobody cares, really. Do too much. Taking it to the next level, Richard explained. Jones asked for an example of the next level. Cross-dressing and like, some people, they like try to make everybody know that they are that, and they try to do too much, and it's just a lot. Jones spun his pencil in circles on his notepad like the spinner for a board game. A lot of people share the same views, he said. People who display stuff outwardly for everybody to see. Then he asked Richard to go through the events on the bus again. I think there's a couple parts where you haven't been completely honest with us, he said when Richard finished. You're a good kid. I like people to be honest with me. We're going to be honest with you. I expect people to be honest with me. He asked Richard to describe what he and Lloyd and Jamal had been wearing on the bus the day before. Then he slid some photographs across the table. Richard, Lloyd, Jamal. Richard picked them up, looked them over. It's pretty obvious we have some pictures, Jones said, tucking the pictures under his notebook. And mind you, these are not still pictures. These are pictures from video. Both of the buses you were on, they have audio and video cameras, Anderson added. With that in mind, I want you to take a quick second and I want you to rethink the story that you told us. And I want you to tell us what really happened. You're not a bad kid, Anderson said. Sometimes we make decisions that are not the best decisions. Keeping in mind that you know we have video, and the video shows everything that happened on that bus. Everything. Right now is a time in your life when you've got to decide, am I going to take responsibility for my actions? Am I going to be honest? Because that dude on the bus whose skirt caught on fire got burned pretty good. Can I see the video? Richard asked. The Interview, Part 3. They only showed him a short snippet of the video, but it was enough. Richard slumped in his chair, one hand shoved in his pocket. Why would you set that dress on fire? Officer Anderson asked. Being stupid. Richard's voice was low. What was going through your mind? Nothing. Have you done this before? No. What would even remotely make you think about setting something on fire like that, someone's clothing? Anderson persisted. That dude got seriously burned. It's not like he went home. He's awaiting surgery at a San Francisco burn center right now. He got burned real bad. What was going through your mind when you decided to light that dress on fire? Nothing. It was a whisper now. Was it because the dude was wearing a dress? Did you have a problem with him? I don't know. People do things for a reason, the officer said. We've all made decisions in life that may not have been the best choice to make at a given time. What we're trying to figure out is why this happened. I'm homophobic, Richard said at last. I don't like gay people. Really? And you had a problem seeing him on the bus? I don't know what was going through my head, Richard said. I just reacted. Did Jamal or your cousin Lloyd tell you to do it? No. I know you said you didn't know what was going through your mind, Officer Jones said. But did you get angry because he's a gay dude in a skirt? Not just being gay, but doing too much? Actually, I really didn't know that his skirt was going to do that. I didn't know that it was going to catch like that, Richard blurted. It was like a little flame. I thought it was just going to go out. But it was too late to backpedal. On the charging documents, Officer Jones wrote in block capitals, "During SUSP interview, the SUSP stated he did it because he was homophobic."